Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest is Fernanda Santos, an award winning author, former New York Times staff writer, Washington Post opinion columnist. She's a professor at the Arizona State University Cronkite School of Journalism, the vice president of the Sauce Foundation. We'll learn about that in a little bit, and co-author of the book that Americano is based on, a Broadway musical. My name is Neil Parekh, and I am the executive producer of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along and the guest host. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, our Digimentors website, and on Fernanda's Twitter account. So thank you everyone for joining us. We have an incredible show today. Not as Carla Barnakis, who's one of our producers who helped introduce us, connect us with Fernanda, said we could have done 3 shows just talking about her work. But in addition to that, we also have a very special section in a cover story on the New York Times, a wraparound cover that we'll show you, marking the 1 millionth death due to COVID, and several special features inside. We're also going to talk about the mass shooting in Buffalo yesterday, the horrific racially motivated mass shooting. But before we do that, let's go ahead and share the promo video that we put together to give you a sense of what we're going to talk about as far as Fernanda is concerned. Here we go. This week on Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along, our guest is Fernanda Santos, an award-winning author and former staff writer for the New York Times. My name is Neil Parekh, and I will be the guest host. Fernanda is currently a columnist for the Washington Post, a professor at Arizona State University's Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication, the author of the book for the Off-Broadway musical Americano, and vice president of the Sauce Foundation, created to honor the legacy of her husband, writer and editor Mike Saucier. She also has a Substack, by Fernanda Santos. She builds it as a place to build community around honest, unfiltered conversations about life as a mother, widow, and writer who is 100% immigrant and 100% American. In recent weeks, we've done a community read-along with several colleagues from Digimentors, Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Andrew Lee, Jenny Lazarus, Robert Anthony, Stephen Kaplan, Rose Horowitz, and Joyce Jones, and special shows focusing on the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, an AJC read-along with Ernie Suggs, and the Philadelphia Inquirer, an Inky read-along with Mike Saucier. This week, we're back to featuring the print edition of the Sunday New York Times. The show is produced by Digimentors. We produce high-quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting, training, and workshops. Sri Srinivasan is our host. I am the executive producer, Neil Parekh. Our production team includes Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Again, Fernanda Santos is our guest, live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. That's a preview of what's to come. There is so much we can share about Fernanda. I'm so looking forward to today's interview. Before we jump into things, let's go ahead and welcome some of the folks who are watching today on various channels. First up, Deborah Kerr, watching from Fort Lauderdale. Deborah, thank you so much for joining us. Jonathan joining us from the East Village, as always. Thank you, Jonathan. Bimmel is watching from Austin, Texas. Joyce Jones on Facebook. He's known as Helm Apollo Ali, joining from Philadelphia. Joyce, it was so great to see you at our Digimentors retreat 2 weeks ago. First time we had a chance to meet in person. So thank you. So glad that you're part of our team. Patricia Freudenberg is joining from New York, saying hi to the New York Times Read Along team. Thank you, Patricia. Miriam Berkeley, watching from Hell's Kitchen. I've mentioned this a few times before. If you're friends with her on Facebook, make sure you check out her reflections photographs. Incredible pictures of New York City, of buildings, etc., but caught in puddles, which I think is really really cool. Um, and Deborah is asking about the orange thing behind me. Is that my chair? Maybe is that what you're talking about? My red chair. Sorry, that's coming out a little orange on that side. Uh, Doug Levy, surprise, joining from Boston. So finally, Doug Levy is based in San Francisco. He's always up at 5:30, just as Fernanda is today, to join the show. But Doug is in Boston this week, so hey, you got to watch at a more normal time, at least for the East Coast. Um, and Patricia is sending prayers and families to the mass shooting in Buffalo. We will certainly be talking about that later, and of course we share our prayers and condolences. But I have to say, even at the outset, there is so much anger, and there's so much. Um, I mean, not just about the gun violence, not just about gun control, but the hate that we're dealing with. It's just we're going to get into it. I'm sure Fernanda has some thoughts on that as well. But this is on a whole different level. Stefan is joining from Ramsey, New Jersey. And yes, hope everyone is well considering these unnerving times. Absolutely. Um, Diane Stefani is joining us from Westchester, Pennsylvania, to be with her husband, the steampunk illuminist at the Merchant of Menace craft store. Interesting. Dr. Sojana Chandrasekhar is saying good morning. Pradnya Haldapur is saying hi from Silver Spring, not far from where I am in Springfield, Virginia, the DMV, as we like to call it. And I'm just checking, just making sure. Deborah says she lost the sound. Paula, give me a thumbs up. I can see you backstage. Sound is still good. Sure. Deborah, hopefully, maybe if you restart or refresh your screen, that might help. Carla Baranakis, I mentioned her earlier. She's one of our producers. She helped us get Fernanda on the show. She's joining from New Orleans. And if it's okay that I share, she's there for the wedding of a former New York Times read along guest, actually, a family wedding. Neil Genslinger's daughter got married yesterday. So, please extend Carla our best wishes to Neil and his family, and of course, to his daughter as well, and her new spouse. Paula is joining from Tallahassee, Florida. She'll be sharing links and responding to comments in Facebook and LinkedIn. Hi, Mom. Mom's watching from Hastings on Hudson, New York. Thank you so much. My mom watches almost every week. I don't know that she's missed a week. She even caught one show on a taxi after flying back from India. She's still logged on to watch. That's my mom for you. And let's see, who else do we have? Lots of people joining. So many people active. You're always saying it was great to meet me as well. And let's see, who else do we have? Mary C. Curtis, another turning in from Charlotte, North Carolina, another former guest. She's a columnist at Roll Call, and admiring former New York Times colleague of Fernanda. Will certainly give Fernanda a chance to give her a shout out later. So with that, I want to just thank everyone again for watching. What we want to do is to take a quick look at what's in the paper, what the paper looks like. But before that, Jeffrey is joining us from Rotterdam, New York. Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining on LinkedIn. I really appreciate it. So what we want to do is we want to show the newspaper, and what we're going to do actually, we're going to start. We have the pencil cam, but we're going to start with the special New York Times cam that we have, because the front page is special today. So let's go ahead and turn that on. And oops, that's not the look that I want. Sorry about that. We'll just do a quick flip on the camera. It's not as easy as it looks, but we will get it. There we go. So there we go. That's the look that we want. And what I want to show you is the front page of the New York Times today. This is a full wraparound cover. Um, Front page is theoretically just the right-hand side here. You can see it's devoted to COVID, um, but it's a full wraparound, full map of the United States. Each of those dots represents a COVID death. And this is an incredible special effort that they put in. The text at the bottom, you can see here, they were mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, daughters and sons. More Americans have died in the pandemic now than in 2 decades of car crashes or on battlefields in all of the country's wars combined, a death rate higher than in almost any other wealthy nation. Each dot on the map represents a person who died of COVID, a rendering of the toll that traces the entire United States. Their families have been left behind, facing an isolating sorrow and the worry that their loved ones will be forgotten in a nation determined to move on. So we'll talk a little bit more about this front page after we have Fernanda join us, but I wanted to just show that to you. So we'll move that out of the way. There we go. And then we'll look at the other sections. This is the special section on COVID, featuring COVID stories of the people who were left behind. So this is the front page, as you can see. And this is the Sunday Review. So this is interesting. Welcome to Pandemic University is what this is showing. Late assignments, failed exams, sleeping in class, even back in person, college students seem to have lost their desire to learn. And I know several friends of mine who are academics have been sharing this article with comments, because some of the commentary is that the professors have been taking it easy on the students. And so we'll definitely want to encourage you to take a look at that. We're going to be spending a lot of time on the COVID story and on Buffalo, but if we get a chance, we'll take a look at that story. The business section, a crypto emperor's vision, no pants, his rules. Interesting. Sam Bankman-Fried, a studiously disheveled billionaire in shorts, wants Washington to follow his lead. Last year's quitters, most of them are at work. That's the great resignation from last year. Sunday styles, another crypto focused story. Crypto joins the abortion conversation. Activists and nonprofit groups are considering digital currencies as a way to raise funds. But can these payment methods really do anything others can't? I knew nonprofits were getting into starting accepting crypto, but I don't know how what the connection is to abortion. George Carlin, of course, passed away several years ago, 14 years ago to be exact. But the humor is still embraced and sometimes misinterpreted across the political spectrum. It's an interesting that George Carlin makes the cover of Arts and Leisure this week. On any other day, we would have spent a lot of time looking at the special cooking section. Sunny side up, hard-boiled, scrambled, eggs can do it all. So look for this online. This should be the cooking specials are always great to look at. Now here's the New York Times Magazine, a very provocative cover. And I'll tell you, when I was setting up the paper and I looked through it, I first read the headline as ape shit. I had to look a little more closely to realize it was shape shift. And I wonder whether that was at all intentional. But that's the New York Times Magazine cover. The book review looks really interesting, a different layout than usual in terms of the way they used color on these front stories. With this Friendly Skies piece, 2 new books show how fed up flight attendants sparked a mass labor movement. And then this call out here on various books. And then this, odd color arrangement. So I'll be curious to see if they continue with the color theme inside. The last thing we have in the paper today, the T magazine, the Style magazine, which we don't usually have time to talk about, but we will see whether we have time to get to. Again, my plan is to focus mainly on the COVID story because there's so much to go through there. But we'll see what else we have time for. But that's the paper. And we will now bring in our guest, Fernanda Santos. And again, as a reminder, Fernanda Santos is a professor at the Cronkite School of Journalism. She is a former New York Times staff writer and a Post opinions columnist. She's also the vice president of the Sauce Foundation, which we'll hear about in a bit, and the a co-author of the book that Americano is based on. So with that, we'll bring on Fernanda Santos. Fernanda, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here, even though I had to get up at 4:45 a.m.
You had to get up at 4:45. Thank you so much for doing that.
I'm an early riser, but today it was, I only get up this early to go hiking. So I psych myself up by saying the second thing best to hiking on a Sunday morning is being on the New York Times Readalong. And
well, thank you so much. Thank you. I want to give a shout out. Our friend Walter Grayson is saying hi from St. Paul, Minnesota. And yes, a very tough morning after yesterday in Buffalo. We'll certainly ask you about that, Fernanda. He's sharing that it's important to look at the waves of COVID deaths, especially the low points. There is a graph that shows that when we look at the detail of the paper, certainly. Let's see who else joined us. I think that was mostly it. So Fernanda, before we begin, we always ask our guests about what the last 2.5 years have been like, particularly under COVID. I know that this has been a particularly challenging 2.5 years for you. Can you please tell us about that?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily characterize the last 2.5 years as challenging for me.
Okay.
When I look back at these 2.5 years of COVID, I've been very privileged to have had good health. My daughter and I did get COVID right at the start of the pandemic in June of 2020. When COVID was like the plague, you would call people and say you had COVID, and it felt like they were even afraid to talk to you over the phone. It was very isolating for us. Obviously, the world was closed, but we were fortunate to be in Arizona and Phoenix, where we could go outside and be outside without being with lots of people. But what I really feel happened to me in these last 2.5 years was a lot of emotional growth. It was such a moment of profound loss, and we were surrounded by it all the time. I've always been, I guess, one of my greatest advantages as a journalist, but also disadvantages is that I'm very empathetic. I tend to feel a lot with people and for people. And it was very difficult for me many days as it was, I'm sure, for many people, to read the newspaper or to, follow the news. I tuned off for a little bit. And when I say growth, it's because in 2017, my husband died of pancreatic cancer. And that was my great loss, right? That was my great feeling of being isolated, being alone, looking around and seeing people enjoying their lives, having a good time, going to parties, talking about everyday things that all of us talk about when life is just going okay. And I felt like my world had completely stopped. So it was sort of it was in some ways it awoke a grief that I had, this idea of being alone and in isolation and feeling something that it seemed like some people didn't even care about. But at the same time, because everybody was so alone and isolated, I did a lot of thinking. I did a lot of talking to my daughter. We did a lot of walks, took a lot of walks together. And then when it got too hot to walk, we would get in the car and go on these, we would call them the drives to nowhere. We'd just drive and drive and drive. And And so when I look back at these years personally, those are years of a lot of introspection and growth for me. But not to say that I didn't grieve, again, for my loss, because every loss reminds me of my loss. But for the people I know who lost someone, and the people I know who died themselves, and just people in general, not just in this country. My family's in Brazil. Brazil had a very tough time with COVID.
Certainly.
Very difficult time getting vaccines. I remember my anxiety over my parents not being vaccinated with a Chinese vaccine that, was a 50% chance of helping you. And so it was kind of like throw the coin up and see what happens. So yeah, a little bit of a long answer, but I had to explain, the sort of the context around it, right?
Of course.
Because when you lose someone, and then I'll shut up. When you lose someone very close to you, even if you are surrounded by people, even if you have friends who check in, people who drop, casseroles, lasagna for you to eat and things like that, people who send you messages and write things on Facebook and things like that. When you go to bed, when you shut off from the world, when you're home, you're so incredibly alone and isolated. And there were times that I felt angry to see the world around me moving on when I was struggling so much, when my daughter was struggling so much. And we couldn't really explain to people exactly what it was we were going through. And so, there is, when I was reading the paper this morning, and I know we're going to get to it, that was one thing. I haven't gotten to all of it, but there was one thing I remember was a story by Julie Bosman that talked about the way people feel about others living their lives normally and them being still stuck. But we'll get to it later.
Joyce is offering his deepest condolences, Fernanda. Of course, we share in sharing those condolences. You mentioned about your husband, Mike. Tell us a little bit about the Sauce Foundation that you started in his memory.
So Mike died within 30 days of his diagnosis of pancreatic
30
cancer.
days. Wow.
30 days. He was
Wow.
He was diagnosed October 2nd. He died November 1st. And, it was such a stunning thing for all of us. We didn't even suspect he was sick. Anyway, shortly after he died, the movie Coco came out, and my daughter wanted to see Coco. And I said, let's go see Coco. I hadn't read about it. I had no idea what the movie was about. I was just looking for an opportunity to connect with my daughter and do something fun, go to the movies. And I cried my eyes out through half of that movie because if you've seen Coco, it's a beautiful movie that really teaches us how to look at death in a very different way. It's the way Mexicans face death. It's this idea that those we love only die when they're forgotten. Flora and I left that movie, my daughter Flora, and we went to have pizza, and she said to me, Mommy, when I get home, I want to do an ofrenda for Daddy. It's an altar. And I said, oh, that's a great idea. There were many ofrendas in this movie. And so we came home, we found a space, we put fun things. She put a little doll that she had. We put his Matchbox cars. We put, my crystals and all these different things. And I started adding on pictures of other loved ones who had passed. And I thought, okay, well, this is our way of honoring his memory and looking at him every day, making him part of our everyday life in a more present way, because he's in our minds and hearts. But how will other people know about him? How will people who never got to meet Mike know that he existed? And our good friends here, Tom and Andrea, came up with this idea. Let's create a foundation. And to me, it was very clear that obviously we would raise money for pancreatic cancer research. Very specifically, we raised money for TGen, which is a research institution based in Phoenix that does genome-based research for cancer. We raise money specific to their pancreatic cancer research. I teach at the Cronkite School. The charter for Arizona State University says that it wants to be a university. It wants to be known for whom they, not by whom they exclude but by whom they include and how they succeed. And Mike and I both always believed in that to be the way of the world, you know. So I said, you know, I'm going to create a scholarship that favors first generation college students like Mike was, and help, help others like him with a little money to carry them through the academic year. And we've now awarded 4 scholarships. There was a 4th one this year. It's an endowed scholarship. We've raised enough money to make it an endowed scholarship. So every time anyone receives a scholarship about Mike, they get to read about the foundation. They get to hear about him from me. And so we, you know, I'm making sure that he's not forgotten. So this way he'll never die.
That's incredible, and what a great legacy for him to raise money both for pancreatic research, but also for the scholarships at ASU. You mentioned that you are at Arizona State University. You teach courses in bilingual reporting and Spanish language reporting. What has been the reaction to those courses? Is this something that people have not had a lot of access to? Is this something that you get a lot of students signing up for?
It's a very interesting process to get people to sign up for the class, because there is a feeling among students that they have to be completely fluent in Spanish. And Arizona has a large population of heritage speakers, those who learn Spanish from their parents at home or their relatives at home. And so a lot of the work is in telling people, because they have to email me and tell me they're interested in the class and so forth. It's an elective, is in telling them that, you know, if all the Spanish you know is from talking to your abuelita when you go to California to visit her, or go to Mexico to visit her, or Ecuador, wherever you're from, it's okay. You know, the purpose of the class is to get students who have some knowledge of Spanish, at least some knowledge of Spanish, to feel comfortable using Spanish in reporting. And interestingly, I'm from Brazil, so my first language is not Spanish. My first language is Portuguese.
Sure.
But I'm also fluent in Spanish, and I, as a good immigrant who is young, scrappy, and hungry, that's a Hamilton line.
Hamilton, of course. We get the job done.
Right, exactly. And so I said, when they proposed that class to me, I said, sure, I can teach a bilingual class. And it's one of the most incredible experiences, because by the end of the semester, what invariably happens is that my students will tell me they're grateful for the fact that they were able to connect with their heritage, that they were able to understand themselves a lot better. So we talk a lot about who we are, the significance of being Americans in the way that we are, and the significance of speaking another language, both as a citizen of the world, but also as a journalist, as a writer. And I feel so, at the end of the semester, it's such empowerment that comes from that room. Interestingly, the past 2 semesters, I've only had women in that class. So I don't know if it has anything to do with the empowerment, being very feminist, but all the men are welcome too. It's just a lot of women, maybe they feel more confident with their Spanish and they come to me, but I've had some incredible male students too. But
sure,
I love teaching that class. It's a new iteration of an older class that the Cronkite school had, but it's a very hands-on, project-based. Go out, you know, we pick a theme. The students go out, they report. They get to know better about their city. They get to go to places in Phoenix, you know, like every large American city built for cars, is very segregated. So they get to go to places that they've never been before. So it's really interesting. It's a great process for everybody, including for me.
Absolutely. You mentioned the Cronkite School. We would be remiss if we didn't share that Sri Srinivasan, our host, is going to be joining you at the Cronkite School in June.
All the cool people at the Cronkite School.
Cronkite, Cronkite Pro, right? So let's take a quick break. I wanted to share with folks this promo video that they put together about Sri joining, so people get that background, because we certainly want to share his announcement and his news, and I know he's excited to join you as a colleague. So let's take a look real quick. And we'll just make sure that we get the sound when we share this. Let's see here. Yep. There we go. And there's the video.
I'm Sri Srinivasan. I'm a social media and digital expert. Having worked in digital media for 25 years, I have seen everything that's come along, the good, the bad, the scary. And I think this is the most exciting time to be in digital media, which I think we should be calling just media now. I've been blessed to work with some of the most important institutions in the US, including Columbia University, where I was the first chief digital officer working on the future of education. I worked as the chief digital officer of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, working on the future of culture, and the chief digital officer of New York City, thinking about the future of cities and citizens. I think the best communicators are the ones who understand the best tools of today, but also understand the traditional values of what makes effective storytelling work. And that's one of the things we're going to be doing, helping folks in any level of journalism, PR, mass communications, come here, upgrade their skills, become smarter at the tools as well as the values, and make a better impact in whatever they do. I'm delighted to be part of this exciting new chapter for the Cronkite School. We'll work with emerging professionals all the way to seasoned leaders to help them become the most effective storytellers they can be.
We're certainly excited for him, and I know you had a chance to meet with him when he came out recently.
Yeah, we had a nice chat, and we're going to be working together on some projects. So I'm really excited. It's really great to have him as part of our team.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, briefly, you mentioned Lin-Manuel Miranda. Lin, he's I mean, we're big fans of Lin-Manuel, of course. I went to Wesleyan University, so we claim him as an alum. We're very proud. We make Hamilton references often on the show, but you have a special connection to Lin-Manuel as well. He was at the Americano recently with his father, right?
Yes.
And so these are a few pictures that were shared. Tell us about Americano. This is a musical on Broadway about immigration, about dreamers. Tell us a little bit about this.
Americano is a very American story, in my opinion. It's based on the true story of Antonio Baldovinos. He's a man who was brought here as a child. He was 2 years old when his parents brought him from Colima, Mexico, to Arizona, looking for a better life and opportunity. But Tony grew up not having any idea that he wasn't documented. And it was only when he decided to join the Marines at the age of 18. He was very determined to join the Marines throughout his younger years. It was only on that day that he discovered that he did not have a Social Security number, which meant that he was not a citizen, didn't have a permanent legal residency in this country, and confronted his parents. And from the depths of his grief and his world that fell apart, Tony decided to do something to contribute to society in a different way. And he became part of this army of young immigrants and children of immigrants here in Arizona, who I actually got to meet right as I moved to Arizona as bureau chief for the New York Times in Phoenix in 2012. They were out on the streets in the barrios, in the heavily Latino parts of the city, knocking on doors, sharing their stories, sharing their parents' story, and telling people who were eligible to vote, who are citizens, that, you should go and vote. They had lists with names of people who were these voters who were not habitual voters. And so we used that story to build the story of Americano, and hopefully bring awareness to in a different way to a global audience, of course, about a very important chapter in the history, in the fight for equal rights in this country. It's a current chapter because there's no resolution to Dreamers, even though there have been attempts for 20 years now, and more than 20 years, and also to get people to really connect with a culture, a story that, like I said, is a very American story, but it's also a very immigrant story. The sound is very inspired by Latin music, especially Mexican rhythms. The music is by the lyrics by Kerry Rodriguez really capture that with our book. And it's just, I mean, it's not because I co-wrote it, but it's a really special, incredible story to me. You know, I have seen that show so many times. I still get chills because I feel so seen, you know, I feel so acknowledged and honored in a space that's not normally a space. It's very rarely a space where stories like ours are a part of. And to me, that's one of the greatest breakthroughs for our musical, is that it's really bringing much in the way that Lin-Manuel has done, you know, in a stratospheric way. We are kind of walking into that space and also carving our path as amplifiers of voices that I believe must be heard in this country.
And this is going back to what, you know, Carla was saying when we first when she first introduced us. We could do a whole show just on Americano and the background and the story itself. But I have one specific question for you in terms of just the timeline for getting to where the show is today, off Broadway, right?
Yes.
When does the story start in terms of pen to paper? When was the
Oh my
story
gosh.
written, and how long did it take to get here?
Well, I can tell you there were, I think, more than 80 versions of the script.
80 versions.
Yes. Excuse me, I gotta take a sip of water.
Hopefully you were
I think
using
that
Google Docs or
was actually
something.
stung me. It's been years in the works. My co-writers started working on this, and I stepped in as a consultant at first because I said to them, I am not a musical writer. I'm
Hmm.
a writer, but I don't write musicals. And they said, okay, well, join us as a consultant then. We will send everything that we write. You can look over it, give us your feedback, your thoughts. And that's what I did for a while. And the show opened in Phoenix right before the pandemic.
Mm.
We had the biggest, highest success, biggest success of any other musical to have ever run in the history of Phoenix theater, which has about, I guess, an 80+ year history here. And so that was in 2020. That was the first time this musical hit the stage, but the work we were already doing the work for, I don't know, 2 years. And then 3 years, I don't even remember. Michael and John were at it longer than me. And then once the pandemic hit, we decided to hunker down, and I joined as a writer because there was a real possibility that we could come to New York. And I said, okay, well, if you think I can do this, then I will. And I told myself, you know what? You know this story, you know how to write characters, you know how to write dialogue. Let's go and apply all those skills in a different way. And here I am today with a name on a marquee in the theater district in New York. It's pretty cool for a kid from Brazil who came here and really didn't know anybody, you know. I really did
Absolutely.
not know a single person in this country when I came here in 1998. So it's pretty cool.
That is really cool. And there's, again, so much, you know, that you've done in terms of we haven't even, you know, talked about your work with the Washington Post yet. You do opinion columns for them. And this is, you know, your page as a contributing columnist based in Phoenix, writing a lot about the Southwest. Where do you have time to do all of this? In addition to the column, you also have a Substack, a newsletter.
I do.
And I want to just to frame this for folks, the way that this is built, this is a place to build community around honest, unfiltered conversations about life as a mother, widow, and writer who is 100% immigrant and 100% American. And I wanted to call attention to that because that's so important. That you talked about Mike earlier. You talked about kind of the experience of that and how that has played out for you. So many people reached out when we talked about him earlier to share their condolences. I want to bring some of those in. Patricia Freudenberg shared her condolences as well. Our friend Stephen Kaplan sending you love and light. Diana mentioned Coco, how powerful a movie that was. You talked about seeing that just after he passed. Mary C. Curtis said that her sister-in-law Juanita had a similar experience with pancreatic cancer. She's married for 45 years to Mary's brother. And Jeffrey is also sharing that we grieve for you. So much support out there. But I think that part of it is also you're not afraid to embrace it. You put it out there in the world. This is part of who you are. This is who you are. You are all these things at the same time. And I know that my mom. Sorry. I lost my father 13 years ago, 2009. So my mom is in the same club that you don't want to be in. And she shared a picture with me where she met with other friends of hers in New York. My parents are from India, other Indian American women of her generation who are all widows. It's a very powerful thing to live with.
And I think that, and I'm sorry for your loss and your mom's loss and the loss of everybody who's, everybody loses somebody. And the reality is that when my husband died, I felt very lonely, very alone, not lonely, alone, my first thought was, why would this happen to me? Right at this moment in our lives. I had just left the New York Times. We had all these plans and dreams. I had so many things that I wanted to do. We had decided to stay in Arizona because Mike's business, he was in communications. He was a consultant, was doing well. And then this happens. Our daughter was thriving. She was 8 years old and, everything fell apart. But I have a very good friend in Brazil, very spiritual. And he called me and he said, he lost his son when his son was 11 years old. And he told me, I'll never forget. He said, don't ask why, ask what for. What's the reason that this happened to you? What are you going to make of it? And I said, I am never going to hide the fact that I am feeling things. If I am sad, I'm going to be sad. And if people ask me how I'm doing, I'm going to be honest. And if I'm going to talk about my life and my past, I'm going to talk about my husband. And I'm not going to hide the fact that he died or that he died of pancreatic cancer, because who knows what other people are going through. And what I've found repeatedly is that in talking about my experience, so many people have come to me, complete strangers sometimes, because I've written about it openly. I've written about it in the Washington Post, prior to that, in opinion pieces for the Sunday Review of the New York Times. I talk about it frequently. I am not afraid to say that I'm a widow. I'm also not afraid to say that I am an immigrant, that I am a mother, a single mother, that I am a homeowner, that I am all these different things. This is a country that my experience here, I for so many years here, I couldn't understand how the power of labels. You know, the labels that people put on us are so reductive. You know, once you become a Latina, then there are all these expectations and people and assumptions people have of what a Latina ought to be like or a widow ought to be like. And I decided that I am going to break all these labels. I'm just going to be me and live these labels, incorporate them as part of me because it's who I am, but live them as my interpretation of these labels. There is no specific 1, 2, 3 things that you have to do once you are of this country or another, or of this background or another, or have had one experience or another experience. So, you know, when I write, when I talk, when I think about the things that I'm going to work on, even Americano is an example of that. You know, it's a show that defies people's, I hope will defy people's definition of American. You know, it's really important for us to start rethinking this idea of who we are as a country, who we are as people, you know, and how reductive it is to put these labels on people and assume that we already know what they're about.
Sorry, I'm back. You can hear me now.
I can.
So I was just saying that my mom, sharing some of the comments.
I could read the comments.
You can read
So
them as we
yes,
were putting them out. My
yes.
mom's condolences and Jeffrey's comments as well.
Thank you.
So just know there's a lot of support. And we also had, I wanted to make sure that we knew Ron Thomas was joining us from Dubai. Ron Thomas is another former guest, and it's always great to see him watching the show. So Ron, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. So what I wanted to be able to do, Fernanda, is talk about the paper itself and spend some time with this COVID special section because there's so much to dig into with that. So we'll go ahead and move to the paper.
I've got my copy.
And you have your copy, and I want to give a quick shout out. You get your copy delivered by the Arizona Republic at between 5 and 5:30 a.m. Local time.
I walked out of my door at 5:15, and there it was, the blue plastic wrapper on my driveway.
Which is incredible. And and on my end, I'm here in Washington D.C. It gets delivered by the Washington Post. It wasn't here at 7:30. I had to scramble to go find the paper. Luckily, it came, as I literally was running to the supermarket. I called my wife, and it was at my on my driveway. But always impressed, and it's always great to see the paper out there. So let's go ahead and we have that special section that special cover story I was telling you about. Let's take a look, and we will dig in. And of course, if anything, if we look at a story, and you want us to go back to it, please, by all means, we can go back. We talked about this front page in case you missed it. in case folks joined us late, the front page is actually a wraparound cover. It's believed to be the first time they've done a editorial wraparound like this. I'm opening it up again for folks so they can see the map. Each dot represents a COVID death. And what I always like, and what we like on the show, is the story behind the story, what they did to actually make this happen. So on page 2 and 3, as readers know, we have the Inside the Times column on the left here. And this one is remembering 1 in 1 million. This is individual reporters recall one of the many COVID deaths that stood out for them. So that's a really interesting piece. But this spotlight section is really interesting, and this gives you the background on the story. They've been working on this for a while. Their goal was to have people look at the cover and say, "This is the news today. Please stop and take a moment and appreciate all these lives we've lost." Carrie Mifsud did the print design for the New York Times for this cover. So shout out to Carrie. What a great job she did, both on the cover and inside as well. They had to look at printing issues. They had to make sure that the map would translate. It's kind of hard to read the detail, but they had to make sure that the dots would fall in the right place and actually replicate their vision. They did several test runs with the design team and the print team. Mike Connors at College Point. Sri actually did a special show from College Point interviewing Mike Connors. They need to make sure that it worked. And then they also had to get approval from their editors and designers, Tom Bodkin and Dean Beckey. Everyone warranted that agreed it warranted special treatment. And of course, they couldn't have known about this horrific shooting that would happen. That would have been the lead story, the display story on the paper, if that had been if we hadn't had this special section. So here's the rest of the paper inside, and we'll get to the actual COVID section. But this is the international section focusing on Russia and Ukraine, of course. This is more trying to survive in Afghanistan and old scraps of war. And so what's interesting is that they have several pages of international coverage today. There have been times when they've had just 1 or 2 pages to focus on COVID. The national story, so the lead national story, of course, is the Buffalo story. And they have the coronavirus update. So let's take a look at this Buffalo story while we're here, and then we'll give a bulk of our time to COVID. 10 shot dead at grocery store in Buffalo. Attack called a hate crime. And the quote at the subhead: "This was pure evil." Fernanda, an 18-year-old is in custody. If you follow the story, he drove from several hours away, I believe with an AR-15, with tactical gear, found a supermarket in a neighborhood, mostly of people of color, shot several people outside, and then went in and just kept shooting. And we mentioned at the opening of the show the absolute hate that is behind this. It's white supremacist ideology, this whole replacement theory bullshit, if you don't mind my saying, on a family show, that is pushed by folks on the right. There have been several. There was the shooting in El Paso, right, a couple of years ago as well. The spa shootings in Atlanta. What were your first thoughts when you saw this?
I've been having so many conversations at my house with my daughter about this idea of how we judge other people, right? How in not understanding, not trying to learn about others, refusing to accept a version of reality and truth that is not the version of reality and truth that you believe in, leads to so much, at the very least, misunderstanding and lack of dialogue. But at its very worst, exactly what happened in Buffalo yesterday. And I've been having conversations with my daughter about that in these past few days. I live in an interesting place where I feel so empowered internally, and also I'm surrounded by people who empower me to live my true self, to be who I am, to do the kind of work that I do. But at the same time, me and all of us live in places or live in spaces, are living in spaces where those who are different are at risk of being attacked, killed, shot at, spat at, screamed at, every day. It's not just Black Americans, Asian Americans, Black, brown, indigenous people every day. So I don't, it's obviously horrific and incredibly tragic, but it's part of something much bigger, right? Than just one kid from Binghamton, New York, who drove basically from the southern part of the state to the northern part with intent, with a camera, and broadcast live on Twitch the mass shooting that led to the deaths of 10 people, almost all of them low-income Black people, going to the supermarket on a Saturday.
I forgot to mention, he live streamed the shooting,
right,
which is just incredible. It just and we have Mary Curtis is sharing that as an African American columnist and podcast host, TV radio contributor, her interactions increasingly echo these same talking points. Have you had to deal with that yourself?
Yeah, I don't think that the type of hate that I have received in emails, mostly from people whose emails are not like legitimate, their personal email addresses, can be in any way compared to the type of hate that my Black American friends, brothers, sisters have received. It's a very difficult country to be a person of color, but it's particularly difficult to be a Black American in this country, especially a successful Black American. I took my daughter for spring break this year to Alabama. We went to Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham. My parents from Brazil joined us. They flew into Atlanta. We spent a couple of days in Atlanta. Then we drove through Alabama, visited these places, spent some time there. And I knew about the history a little bit. I didn't know as much as I learned while there. And I was stunned by the amount of hate that exists toward and existed and still exists toward Black Americans, African Americans. And I was also felt incredibly, I feel very, I don't even know what the right word to say. Happy is not the right word, but to see the success that so many of them have achieved. Many of them, my friends, people in my circles, like Mary, right? But the most interesting kind of things that people tell me is to go back to Mexico, which is kind of interesting because I'm not from Mexico.
Yeah.
And I would love to go to Mexico, but it just comes to show that Mexico also became, especially during Trump's presidency, became sort of like synonym with the country, like where horrible people come from. And immigrant, Latino became synonym with Mexican. Immigrant became synonym with undocumented immigrant. And so there was one incident in Phoenix that was the only time that I was somewhat afraid when I was having a coffee at a Starbucks outside. and shortly after the election of Trump, and talking to this woman who helped with childcare at home. And she's Mexican American, citizen of this country, has lived here much longer than me, but we speak in Spanish. It's her first language. I like to speak Spanish, and we speak in Spanish. So I was talking to her on the phone, and this older man was staring at me, and he came to me, older white man, came very close to my face and said to me, speak Spanish. And he had so much, speak English. I'm sorry. He said, speak English. And it was like spitting at me. He was just so mad that I was speaking Spanish. And I had steeled myself for that moment. Like, I thought one day it's going to happen. But when it happened, I had no reaction. I was completely in shock. And in Arizona, all the time I was thinking, people carry guns here. What if he has a gun? What if I say the wrong thing and he shoots me? And the only thing I could say was, I speak 4 languages, which is true. And he just got even more angry, and at some point walks away. And I was sitting there completely paralyzed. But I said, imagine what it must be like to live that way every day, to stand out so much. So many people who are people of color who live in communities that are predominantly, Caucasian, and they stand out so much, and they become this sort of like center of gravity and attraction, and also vitriol and hate. I don't know. I think I went in a few different directions here, but I just have been thinking a lot about this whole idea of diversity, of accepting others. And I think that this country just has a really hard time. Not this country, the white center, a certain segment of the white population in this country is having a very hard time accepting anything that is, and anyone that is different than they are. And they believe that who they are and what they are is the norm, and is what it means to be American, is what it means to be patriot. And anybody and anything that is different is not only not acceptable, but also hated and in need of expulsion, in need of deletion, in need of getting people away from here. And that's what moved Kyle Rittenhouse and the kid yesterday, Peyton, I forget his last name, starts with a G.
I don't even want to say his last name.
I don't even want to say either. It's
But this is Joyce's comment about Kyle Rittenhouse is I think right on target. It again, just the fact that someone, and he was helped, if I remember correctly, Kyle was helped by his mother, drove him to Kenosha, and it's just incredible that this is what we have going on in our country. And that, it's the gun violence itself is the problem, and we have the mass shootings and the attempts at gun control that never happened after Columbine, after Sandy Hook, after Stoneman Douglas High School, Marjorie Stoneman in Parkland, the Pulse shooting in Orlando, Las Vegas. The list goes on and on and on. But then when you add this additional layer of abject hate and white supremacy, and the support from Fox News, it gets gets to be a lot.
And I think there is a in my mind, there is a connection between this that we're talking about and the fact that there seems to be somehow this acceptance of all these COVID deaths that are happening. One thing that we've been hearing in sort of bits and pieces, right, spread out through like smaller stories, commentary, is the fact that communities of color, in particular Black and Brown communities, have been disproportionately affected by COVID and COVID deaths. Of course, these are the people who many of them had jobs where they didn't have a choice to stay home, right? I have so much respect and empathy for people who have really struggled to juggle different things at home, husband working from home, wife working from home, kids teaching, learning from home. But, the whole time I kept thinking, what about the people who don't have a choice? I remember writing a story for the New York Times Magazine, words to the pictures taken by Meredith Kohut in Los Angeles County that showed the toll that COVID was taking in the Latino community in Los Angeles County. And I wonder if people don't care as much because it's this idea that, people of color are expandable, that there is a lower value ascribed to their lives than the lives of white people, and I say a white Caucasian because there are white Hispanics, and
Sure.
But I just can't stop wondering that if it's maybe too many deaths have numbed us, but what if there were these many deaths were primarily of white people? Would
It's clearly that would have been an issue. I think that without I'm not necessarily going to make assumptions about the majority of Americans and kind of how they looked at it, but we do know, I think, with some good insights, how our leadership at the time looked at it, how President Trump looked at it. Once it he realized that it was disproportionately impacting people of color, he could care less. And I think that's well, let's take a look at that COVID section, because they actually focus on that as one of the special areas. But it's certainly, I mean, a lot of the commentary about these COVID deaths, 1 million number, which is universal, the disproportionate impact on people of color, all could have been avoided. I mean, certainly not in these numbers. I don't know if it would have been completely avoided, but the absolute devastation that we saw to communities, whether you look at people of color, different geographies, age groups, it all could have been mitigated if they had taken it seriously, if they had, taken certain actions in at the very beginning. So let's go ahead and turn to the that section, because I really want to dig into what they're saying. I know you have it there as well, Fernanda. So let's go ahead and take a look at the paper. And again, I'll put it in a view so that you can see it. Let's see here. There we go. And so this special section is this pullout right here. Now I'm curious. I know that here in Washington, in the Washington Post, they can't print the full section. I wonder if this is a separate section for you, Fernanda.
Yeah, it is a separate section. Yeah,
special report. This might be intentional this time, since it's billed as a special report. These pictures on the front page, a grim milestone that can only hint at the pain and suffering of those Americans who are mourning family members, friends, neighbors, and colleagues. And at the bottom, the many millions who are left behind. The virus stole lives from all sections of society, leaving those left behind with little more than mementos, like a work badge or an engagement ring, and perhaps a shared feeling that the lives of the dead have been pushed to the side in the rush to return to pre-pandemic normal. There's no national memorial, no shared remembrance, no place to gather or receive a nation's sympathy. We haven't even talked about that yet, this rush to return to normal. But just to pick up the conversation that we had, we'll look at the whole section. But I want to skip ahead to this impact on COVID by race, which I believe is in here. I'm looking for this is death rates by age, Here we go. Rate by race and age. So this chart right here at the bottom, this is showing Black and Hispanic people have had the highest death rates of all age groups. So that darker line is Hispanic. I actually didn't realize that Hispanic was higher than Black. For age 85 and older, 75 and 84. You see how those lines go all the way out? It's Hispanic, Black, white, and then Asian, for the most part, as the smallest lines. Just incredible. Just incredible.
And I think it speaks, it's an interesting thing because in Latino families, there is as in Black families, the intergenerational living is very common.
Yeah.
It's very common that you will live with your parents and your grandparents will live there too. And so, if one person would get sick in a home, let's say a younger person brings it home, the most, generally speaking, the most vulnerable would be the older person in the house. I actually have, she's a very good friend of mine, who works as a nanny in New York. And her husband did some this construction work, and she's Colombian, and her parents lived with her, and her younger daughter lived, her daughter, she has a little boy, but also a daughter who is in college at the time, lived with her, and the daughter got COVID, and then the father was the one who died. They all got COVID in the house.
Wow.
And so it's, I think when you look at the age, especially 85 and older, and also 75 to 84, I would guess that a lot of that has to do with the fact that there were older people living at home, and were not shielded, from others. Although we also know the very large number of older Americans who died in nursing homes as well. But it's very, it's a picture of the labor force. There is a correlation with
Yes.
the activities that these people do. What the kinds of jobs these people do for a living. When you go to a restaurant, to a hotel, and you look at the housekeeping staff, it's by and large, it's people of color, but primarily Latino, Black people, cleaning our rooms, cooking our food, stocking the shelves at supermarkets, stocking the shelves at pharmacies. So these people invariably, they don't have cars. Many times they use public transportation. So they are exposed, and they have been exposed. They are still exposed in so many different ways that it's very difficult, right? For you to avoid, to have the luxury to avoid how they wish that their only problem was that everybody was stuck at home working together and going to school together at home, right?
Workers without options. People working in in meat packing,
Right.
transit workers, grocery store workers, people who had to commute, who had to take mass transit. That was all. These are all factors. Let's take a look at the section from the beginning. You mentioned the piece by Julie Bossman. This is that first story. Journey is lonely for those who lost loved ones. And just in terms of the layout, I mean, what I like, and again, Carrie Mifsud did the graphic design for the print edition. I also want to point out that online it's very impactful as well. If we get a chance, I'll show that to folks. But Paula has shared gift links in Facebook, in LinkedIn, so that you can, if you're not a subscriber, you can still see the story. We shared a gift link from our account. But at the bottom of each page, the path of COVID in pictures. It arrived in the United States by early 2020, setting off 5 distinct waves over the 26 months that followed. And as the bottom, it's almost like a film strip at the bottom of each page. Different images from March 2020 to April, and on. So this is they led with a story about for those who lost loved ones. And then this is the main story. This is what they led with online: how COVID claimed the lives of so many in the U.S. That's the one that has all the rich data visualization. This article is by Amy Harmon, Danielle Ivory, Lauren Leatherby, Albert's son Jeremy White, and Sarah Al Mukhtar. And it's an interesting mix of reporting and graphics and data analysts that came together to put the story together. This is the graph, daily deaths from COVID, and it shows these peaks. This is the first wave. Then it peaks up. This is the winter wave in 2021, Delta, and then you see Omicron almost as high as the winter wave from last year. It's much higher, I think, and particularly now with all the rules being relaxed and places opening up and mask mandates going down. It's really really scary. Myself, my daughter got COVID back in February, and I got it a few days later. Thankfully, there were mild cases. We're only sick for a day or two each. But so many people had it much worse. Thankfully, we were both vaccinated, and I was boosted. But this is the rest of the story. So they have this graph, COVID death rates by age. You see the skews very strongly to older ages, 85 and older is that line at the bottom. We talked about by race and age earlier. By vaccination status is another graphic they put together. And you can see that the vaccinated level is the one at the bottom. You can barely see it. A little blip over there in January 22, but the unvaccinated is what really has the big peaks. Huge cost for seniors. Deaths by region. The Northeast. So this is the first graph is the graph of the Northeast. The Midwest. You see where it started in the Northeast. Actually started in Washington State, the very first cases, but it wasn't very high. The big peak was in the Northeast, Midwest, the West, and then look at the South. Just really high peaks at the bottom. This is the smaller graph. And then also deaths by income in major cities. So if you take a look at that for a second, the cluster of higher death rate, lower income is up here. You see this cluster on the left, low income, and the lower death rate over here in this middle income. This is 0 to 200,000. This is for New York City. This is for Los Angeles. And the last page, I think, was also incredible for folks who are fans of The Daily Show. Not the Trevor Noah Daily Show, but The Daily, rather, from the New York Times. And I know our colleague Rose Horowitz, who's watching, had listened to the Daily. Do you listen to the Daily podcast?
Not every day, but I do listen to it.
So
I like to vary the perspectives through which and the choice of stories, through which I approach the news of the day. So I listen to the Daily not every day.
Sure.
Not a criticism of the Daily, just that there's other,
of course.
I like variety.
There's a lot to try and keep up with.
Just with my newspaper, I read the Times. I have the Times. I get it every day, but I really make a big effort to, and I read the Washington Post, but I make a big effort to read even the coverage, like the Buffalo coverage. I went to the Buffalo News. I didn't read the Times. I went to the local paper,
I saw the Buffalo Public Radio story about it.
Right. So, it's usually, I would hope that the local paper is the best one to cover the local news,
Sure,
especially breaking news. So
what's interesting is the last page of this section, the headline, "There's not a day that goes by." The Daily asked listeners to share memories about loved ones they lost during the pandemic. More than 200 people responded, and we are printing a selection of the responses here. Together, they offer a portrait of what it's like to grieve when it seems like the rest of the world is trying to move on. Listen to the audio at NewYorkTimes.com/daily. We'll certainly share a link to the audio. But just as an example, and they actually start off with my husband, Floyd Cardoz, passed away from COVID on 25th of March, 2020. He was just 59 years old. He was an amazing chef, internationally known, had restaurants in the past in New York and in Mumbai, India. Floyd, it was someone that Sri knew very well. And I remember when he got the news that Floyd had passed, and it was very, very shocking and very, it was incredible. I know that he's been in touch with Floyd's widow as well. But this whole back page has similar statements. This other one down here, Lib Williams, my grandma, 89, September 30th, 2020. I miss sitting together under her pecan tree, and I miss her regular questions like, "How is your life, Sug?" The last one, Dominic Petrella, he was my dad, age 65, passed away January 2022. He was a fighter, and he loved Gandalf. This is reminiscent of the portraits of grief that the New York Times did after 9/11. They did similar vignettes early in COVID, but it's powerful to have just one line or two lines to represent someone's life, someone's grief. It's really interesting. So thank you very much, Fernanda, for looking through that with us. We really meant a lot. What do you think? Do you remember other special sections like that the Times has done? Have you been involved in anything like that before?
Oh gosh. I mean, obviously 9/11, I remember that. I did not work for the Times at the time. I know there were others. I just don't remember specifically which ones they were. I'm still stuck on this line here from a nurse on that last page that I just want to just quickly reflect on that. It was a nurse who said, my name is Victoria and I'm an RN from Ohio, and I would like to memorialize Margaret. Margaret was a patient of mine who passed away from COVID in October 2020. As a new nurse, she was the first person I have ever watched die. I don't know much about her. I can't even remember her last name, but I was able to hold her hand and make sure that she knew that she wasn't alone. That to me is the most beautiful thing in this section, because so many people, that was the biggest and most challenging, I think the most painful part of COVID is all these people who died alone. My father had COVID very badly. He was in the ICU in Brazil. And I kept thinking the whole time, please don't let him die alone. Please just don't let him die alone. If he dies, and he didn't, he thankfully made a comeback and he's alive and well these days, thankfully. But so many people died alone, and these nurses, these medical professionals, carry so much grief for people they didn't even know. I just, when I got to that line, it really got to me, because we many times forget about I think that the grief of those who lost someone to COVID is compounded by the fact that many of those lives that were lost, the people who lost them couldn't be by their sides when they died. I had the great fortune to be right next to my husband. He died at home. He wanted to come home. We brought him home, and he was here with me, my mother-in-law, his mom, and my sister. And my mom was asleep with my daughter. To not be there with that person when they die is very painful. And I think that little line there just captures so much about COVID that, none of us could ever articulate that more beautifully than that nurse.
Sure. A lot of people died alone in those early days. It really was incredible. Fernanda, I want to thank you for joining us. We have just a few minutes left. I want to give you a quick break. We'll make a few announcements, and then we'll bring you back on to share some final thoughts, and we'll bring this show to a close. So thank you, Fernanda. We'll give you a chance to be off camera for a little bit. Again, my name is Neil Parekh, and I am the executive producer and guest host of SRI's Sunday New York Times Read-Along. Our guest today has been Fernanda Santos, and we focused a lot on this COVID special section from the New York Times, marking 1 million deaths to COVID. We want to make sure you join us next week. Jack Curry will be our guest. I can't tell you how excited I am. Jack Curry, I read him when he was a sports reporter for the New York Times. He is a analyst for Yes Network, calling Yankee games. He's written a new book with Paul O'Neill, Swing and a Hit. He's also written books with Derek Jeter and David Cohn. For those of you who know me, and you could see the hat, I am an incredible Yankees fan. So we will certainly do our best to keep the show, focused on biography and kind of general issues. But don't be surprised if I'm wearing my Yankee jersey next week, because I am certainly thrilled for next week's show, as I am for every show. Hopefully that comes across. I want to make a point to thank our production team: Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Carla, of course, helped bring us Fernanda, and has been an integral part of the team. Thank you very much, Carla. And of course, whenever we mention Carla, we also talk about the Local Connection newsletter. The Local Connection newsletter is put out by the Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University. And each week it offers this ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips, bit.ly/local news tips. That team and others are all part of Digimentors, the production company that SRI started, the social and digital consulting firm. We moved into virtual and hybrid event production when the pandemic hit. If you're interested in having us produce a show like this for you, please reach out, Sri@digimentors.group or Neil@digimentors.group. There, with the move, there may be a little bit of a move away from virtual, but hybrid events are their own challenge. And we just produced a great hybrid event for Princeton University this weekend. And so we're more than happy to take on any projects. We also do social media audits and consulting for a number of different groups. So reach out if you're interested in having us work for you. We also want to give a shout out to Muckrack, a longtime sponsor of SRI's shows. Thank you to Muckrack for all of your support. With that, we're going to bring back Fernanda and let her offer some final thoughts. And while you're getting ready to do that, Fernanda, I just want to share some of the comments that we got. Jeff, watching from Rotterdam, New York. Nice session. Thanks, Fernanda. And Ron Thomas talking about the A team, our production team, as always. Thank you, Ron. Ellen says thank you for this. I'm sure it was painful, but I'm also grateful for your thoughts. Mary said thank you for all you do, Fernanda. Fan of your Washington Post columns, and lovely seeing you again. You look wonderful.
Thank you, Mary.
And Patricia saying thank you to the entire production team as well. So with those nice thoughts in your head, Fernanda, can you offer us some final thoughts and a pro tip for writers?
I think they're both connected. The final thought is don't wait until something tragic happens in your life for you to discover who you are, and be proud of who you are and embrace who you are and wear that. I unfortunately had to go through something very challenging, very, very difficult to stop and think about my identity, who I am, what I'm made of, the different parts that make me. So, spend more time thinking about that and honoring that and loving and embracing that, those many different sides of you. And last time, comparing yourself to others. It sounds really cheesy, but I just find that we're so drawn to just thinking of measuring our worth, measuring our accomplishments, measuring how good or bad we are at things by comparing ourselves to other people. In journalism, that's very, very common. It's a very egocentric profession, starting by the fact that stories start with somebody's name out there. So who was on the front page today and things like that, and when there's so much more that goes into everything that we do and every day that we live in our lives. And there's so much more to us than even just the work that we do or works. Some of us do more than one thing. And my pro tip is connect to that, because I believe that the best writing for me has happened when I started to work on accepting the writer who I am, the limitations that I have, acknowledging those and working on improving those, while also freeing myself from what I thought others expected me to be like, and just being who I can be, being the best version of myself every day. Writing is really challenging, especially if you're writing for journalism, for newspapers, magazines. But it can be any kind of writing, right? You put that writer's hat on, and all of a sudden you sit in front of the computer to write, and nothing comes out. Everything sounds stiff and heartless and soulless. So my tip is, just let it out. Don't stop yourself. Don't think of what other people are going to think of what you're writing. Let it all out first, and then you can sort through things and work with someone to help you sort through it. But embrace really who you are, and don't be afraid to be who you are and talk about the things that are inside of you. That's what saved me. That's what made me who I am today, is the fact that I decided that I was not going to hide, be afraid, try to conform to other people's expectations, try to live by other people's idea of who I should be or what I should be like. I am who I am. And I realize now that I'm much better at everything that I do because I accept that.
Thank you so much, Fernanda. Appreciate that. For folks who are watching who may have joined us late, you can watch the show right on the same channels. Right as soon as we're done, it'll go back to the beginning. You can watch on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and our Digimentors website. We really appreciate you taking the time with us this morning, early in the morning for you in Phoenix. 5:30 local time. You were up at 4:45, you said, so that's a lot. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate that, and we'll definitely take strength from what you're putting out in the world with your Substack, with your columns, with Americano, and being a mom as well.
Yes, my most important job.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, and we will stay in touch.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.